Alright, it's been a while. My video schedule has been all kinds of screwed up lately. I was finishing the next Claire Obscure video and then a water main burst across the street and flooded our basement, and my office was in that basement, so that was a huge mess. Now, a few days later, me, my office, and 3 cats have been moved to a totally different address. Everything is settled in now, and it really wasn't a terrible disaster or anything. Nobody was hurt, everybody still got their health, the cats are fine. But this week I decided I wanted to work on something a little easier, a little more fun, so hey, I'm bringing back the Ask Me Anything series. And I am going to throw some footage of a game called Automaton Lung up on the screen, which was a weird old school indie 3DS platformer. It kind of looks like a piece of crap, but it's actually really cool, and a sequel is currently in development, so check that out. Okay, before we dig into the questions, a quick update on the schedule. I plan to make 2 more videos on Claire Obscure. Both of them will be relatively short, because I've already said most of what I wanted to say about the game in previous videos. These next 2 are really just cleanup, and they will focus on Renoir and Mael. Next up is Elden Ring Night Rain. At first I was going to skip Night Rain because it seemed pretty light on story content, but I've been playing it a bit more and I actually think it has some interesting ideas that I want to talk about. I am just a total sucker for the way From Software writes their stories. I love piecing together these mysteries they build. I cannot help myself. And going forward, the way I plan my video schedule is going to change. If you've been subscribed for a while, you probably noticed that I tend to jump around a lot. I start on one series, then bounce over to another, and then the first series never actually gets finished. That chaotic schedule was a result of chasing current trends, trying to keep up with current releases, or constantly looking for higher view counts, or because I've developed kind of a diverse audience and I don't want people to get bored if I spend too much time on any one game. But I have grown dissatisfied with that way of doing things. It makes a huge mess. From now on, when I choose a game or series to cover, I will stick with it until I feel like my discussion of the game is totally complete. For example, looking at the analytics, these Claire Obscure videos did not perform very well. The numbers are well below the channel average. In the past, I would have panicked and I would have said like, oh my gosh, the channel is dying, and I would have pivoted to something else, something that I thought would get me higher view counts. But this time, even after looking at all those scary numbers, I decided to stick with it. That is the plan going forward. I'm going to focus a little less on what I think the algorithm wants, and maybe even a little less on what I think my subscribers want, and focus a little more on, I don't know, some form of artistic integrity, I guess. So for example, for Night Rain, I will do a video on its primary antagonist, and probably at least 1 video on each Nightfarer. Those might be a bit shorter than usual since the writing in that game is a bit simpler. Anyway, regardless of view counts or whatever else, I'm going to stick with Night Rain until I am finished. And the same goes for whenever I return to the God of War retrospective series. Once I have started, I want to keep going until I have covered every game and every villain in the God of War series. And I know that will be annoying for some viewers who don't care about God of War, and I am sorry, but I don't know, I can't please everyone all the time. Okay, one more note before I get into the questions. I am going to organize things a bit differently this time. Previously, in parts 1 and 2, I just went through the questions in the order they were asked. This time, I am going to curate, try to focus on questions that will lead to more interesting discussions. I am also skipping any question that was basically some form of, will you make a video about this or that game? Instead, I put together a long list at the end of this video of games and series I want to cover eventually. That way I can answer all of those questions at once without it taking over the whole video. Alright, let's get started. First question, oh, and by the way, for the sake of time and being able to answer as many questions as possible, I am not going to include screenshots of the questions in the video like I did last time. I'm just going to read them out loud. Anyway, first question. One person asked me, and I do not know who because I did not write down any usernames, which was probably a mistake, but whatever. One person asked, what are your thoughts on humanity and the current time of the entire human race? Well, that is a big question, buddy, but I will do my best. Like a lot of people, what I see in the news upsets me. Wars, bombings, natural disasters, economic disasters, death and sickness and suffering, the infinite scroll of outrage and anger and hysteria and fear-mongering that dominates all social media. It can be overwhelming at times, and I think maybe that is what this person was asking about. Well, I read a lot of history, just, for fun, not serious study, and I find that viewing current events through a historical lens can bring me a lot of peace. Sort of stepping outside of my individual head, outside of my personal feelings and anxieties and whatever else, and trying to look at things from a broader perspective. Whenever something is going on in the world that upsets me, or even the opposite, something that I think is really great, I try to remind myself that the arc of history is long. The arc of history is very long. If you spend any time at all reading history, you will very quickly encounter these stories of dramatic rises and falls. Like, oh, this guy Jugurtha is on top of the world. Jugurtha is untouchable. All of Jugurtha's dreams are coming true today. And then you turn the page of the book you're reading, and oh shit, Jugurtha's life is in shambles now. Jugurtha has been exiled to the desert. He's a wanted criminal. He's living in a goddamn cave with scorpions and rats. Bummer for Jugurtha. And then you turn the page and look at that. Another decade has passed and Jugurtha is on the upswing again. Everything is great for Jugurtha now. And then on and on and on the pages turn. And the other thing is, no one knows who the hell Jugurtha is now. He was a colossus of his time and place. He was a household name. He was a king, a general, a great diplomat. And now he is just a name. His kingdom vanished thousands of years ago. Every trace of his influence has been wiped from the face of the earth. And history is filled with hundreds upon hundreds of Jugurthas, many of whom even their names have been lost. All of those dramatic turnabouts and hard-fought battles and total victories and miserable defeats, which must have seemed so important in the moment, were really just another sprinkling of grains of sand in the hourglass. We just saw a micro version of this in the last 2 US elections. In 2020, when Biden was declared the winner, Democrats were celebrating in the streets. Oh, we did it, everything is gonna change now, we saved America! While Republicans were in hysterics, like, oh no, America is over, it's done, we're all gonna die. And then just 4 short years pass and their roles are reversed. Donald Trump is on top of the world. Donald Trump is untouchable. All of Donald Trump's dreams are coming true, and then whether you like him or not, the pages of history will inevitably turn again, and everything will change. A year from now, a decade from now, a century from now. History teaches us to be modest in victory, to be gracious, to be thoughtful. Success today is never, ever a guarantee of success tomorrow. In fact, the very things that made us successful today are often what drives us to failure tomorrow. The seeds of defeat are frequently sown in the throes of victory, and history teaches us to be patient in defeat. The pages of history will turn again, and those who keep working, keep thinking, who don't lose their heads, who don't lose themselves to hysteria, those who are steady and stable will often make it to the other side of that page. It's not a guarantee. Things don't just change on their own. You do have to work for it. You don't just get to sit around on your ass and wonder, hey, why hasn't anything changed yet? But the pages will turn with or without you. This does not just apply to politics, but to every aspect of our lives, our work, our relationships. There are so many times in my life that I can look back on when I was so happy and so sure that everything was going to work out for me, or the opposite, times when I was so unhappy, when it felt like nothing could ever get better, and I was always wrong. The next week, the next month, the next year always brought something that I could not have predicted. There is a peace to be found in understanding that this moment, however miserable, however joyful, is temporary. Or, to borrow a phrase from a recent popular video game, tomorrow comes. So to answer that question a little more simply, the current state of humanity and our time, as extraordinary and frightening as they may seem, is basically the same as it has always been. There has always been war, there has always been corruption, and on the opposite side, there have always been peacemakers, and there have always been those who try to do what is right. In this time, as in all times, you get to choose which of those you are going to be. See, wasn't that fun? Alright, number 2. Someone, and again I don't know who because I did not write down any usernames, asked if I would ever think about doing a video on a character who does not work at all, like your God of War videos where you explain how well written the characters are, but instead you talk about how badly they're written. Characters like Kai Leng from Mass Effect 3, Dogen Gera from Jedi Survivor, or in my opinion, Abby from The Last of Us Part 2. Abby is an interesting character to include in this list because I think she's only a failure of a character if you believe that the writers wanted you to like her. And I don't think so. I do not think the writers expected the majority of the audience to like or even support Abby. She is not in the story to convince you that the Fireflies were right all along, or that you are wrong for approving of Joel's decision, or anything like that. When she is introduced, she is portrayed in the worst possible light. She betrays someone who just saved her life, and she doesn't just kill him, but brutally tortures him first. Even some of the other characters in her group, like Owen and Mel, are written to react negatively to her actions. Abby is portrayed as a sort of mindless thug, a very simplistic character who tortures people for fun, who is incapable of seeing things from someone else's perspective. It is not until she rescues the 2 Seraphite kids that she begins to get a little more complicated. It is only her relationship with that kid that stops her from murdering a pregnant woman. On her own, she would have just kept choosing violence. It is not a redemption arc really, it is a character whose perspective is broadening, who stops looking at the world solely through a binary black and white lens. And from that perspective, I think she is successful enough as a character. Her character arc is a bit meandering and lacking focus. She's never very likable. She's never as interesting as Joel or Ellie, but then again, I don't think she was supposed to be. If anything, her character is a criticism of people who try to look at the story from a simplistic, moralistic lens. What a lot of people just do not seem to be able to get past is that this is not a story about whether what Joel did was right or wrong. It is a blunt exploration of the extremities of human nature, the essential brutality of human nature, but also the essential goodness, the push and pull between those 2 extremes, which you see very clearly in Abby's character. At times she is very brutal and vicious, and other times she is very good and kind. To actually answer your question, no, I don't think I will ever go out of my way to do an analysis of why a character is written poorly. I want this channel to be a celebration of games and stories that I love. I'm much more interested in questions like, what makes this story so compelling? How do the writers create meaning within this story? I don't want to do hit pieces tearing down other writers. That sounds miserable to me. There's already enough shittiness and negativity in the world. Let this be a space for something positive. Alright, number 3. This person asked, who is the best written character in any media you have consumed? Games, TV shows, or books? And who is your favorite character from any media? Are they the same character? And if not, why? I thought about this one for a long time. I just went over and stared at my bookshelf for like 30 minutes. I kind of want to get weird with it, and it definitely would be a character from a novel. For example, is Rose of Sharon from Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath the best written character of all time? She starts out as this typical teenage girl stereotype who doesn't care about anything but boys and fairy tales, and she's just a minor supporting character. And then by the last page, she is transformed into this fascinating and strange symbol of human communion. nourishing a random starving man with the breast milk meant for her stillborn baby. Few things have stuck with me the way the final image of that novel has stuck with me. I've never read or seen anything else quite like it. So is she the best written character in literature? I don't know, maybe, why not? Or what about Anna Morgan from Jean Rhys's Voyage in the Dark? To summarize for those unfamiliar, Anna Morgan is a young woman living in London, but originally born in the Caribbean. So while she is technically English, she is still very much an outsider. Her immediate family is dead, and so she is alone in the world without either financial or emotional support. The story is essentially a slow motion collapse of her life, losing her job, falling almost by accident into prostitution, and then things only get worse from there. I originally read it for a class when I was in graduate school, and I remember feeling very connected to her. But other people in the class talked a lot about how frustrating she was, because there are potential opportunities that come her way, but she does not seize on them. She doesn't seem to try very hard to survive. It's almost as if she just accepts self-destruction. But I thought it was not acceptance, it was the opposite. It was defiance. It was a very similar story to Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener, and now I have to summarize that story. Okay, so Bartleby is a character who works in a lawyer's office. At the start of the story, he is a fantastic worker, the best the lawyer has ever seen. And that's important because it shows that he is not lazy, not incapable. He could survive very successfully in this system if he wanted to. But eventually, a day comes when Bartleby begins to refuse to work. When he is assigned a task, he simply says, "I would prefer not to." After a while, he gets fired. He gets evicted from his apartment. He cannot afford food. At the end of the story, the narrator encounters Bartleby starving to death on the street, and he's like, all you have to do is get a job. Do some work, make a little money, and you could survive. It's not that hard. But Bartleby just keeps repeating his mantra, I would prefer not to. And so he starves to death on the street. And the narrator is just totally flabbergasted. He cannot understand it. But I was always so impressed by the character of Bartleby. He has such integrity. He is a heroic figure. Both he and Anna Morgan from Voyage in the Dark are characters who simply refuse to get on, using the author's phrase. They refuse to survive. It's not suicide. It's not self-destruction. It's not giving up. It's a kind of passive defiance or personal non-violent protest. Money is bullshit. Life sucks. Everyone is an asshole. I do not want any part of this. It's not fuck you. It's not punk rock. It's just I prefer not to. I guess you could throw Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye into this group as well. And if you're unfamiliar, Holden Caulfield is a kind of whiny, miserable teenager who hates everyone and says that everybody is a phony, and he never wants to grow up, he never wants to be an adult, he just wants to go live in the woods and be far away from everyone else. All three of these characters tend to come off as kind of pathetic and whiny and off-putting. They are not winners. They never achieve any kind of meaningful victory. They don't lead any revolution. They never do anything to change the systems they so despise. I distinctly remember discussions in high school where the other kids in class were asking questions like, what is Holden Caulfield's problem? Why doesn't he just stop whining and do something? Why can't he just act like a normal protagonist, someone I can root for? And the answer is because Holden Caulfield is us. Most of us are not great heroes, we're just ordinary people. Most of us have to choose between conforming to the system we were born into, with all of its bullshit and greed and injustice, or else nothing. There is no other choice. We cannot go hide in the woods. The system is too big for any one person to change. There is nowhere else to go. It's either survive here, which also means undermining our own integrity and sense of what is right and wrong, or else die. Like I only get to survive by letting YouTube put all these scammy, gross advertisements on my videos. I don't want that. Do you think serious writers have advertisements for horny gooner bait mobile games in the middle of their novels? Voyage in the Dark, Bartleby, and Catcher in the Rye are all about characters who say, you know what, actually, I would rather just die. Like, I wish I could have the integrity to just starve to death on the street, writing stories no one will ever read rather than accept Google's ill-gotten money. But I'm no Bartleby, and actually, I quite like having a roof over my head. So give me more money, Google, because I'm your fat little greedy bitch. That got kind of weird. That was a long, weird tangent I just went on. I forgot what I was even talking about. The second half of this question was, who is my favorite character? Well, my all-time favorite novel is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Nowadays, Shirley Jackson gets pigeonholed into the horror genre, and that really is not an accurate description of her work. She was a very serious literary author. Her work was all about human psychology, the darker side of human nature. If there is any horror in her stories, it's not about ghosts or monsters or bloodthirsty killers. It's about the horror that can be seen in ordinary domestic life. All of the little hideous and terrible ways we tend to treat each other every single day, sometimes without even realizing it. Relationships, family, jealousy, resentment, bitterness, these very ordinary feelings and situations that can slowly destroy lives over the course of years. And We Have Always Lived in the Castle was her undisputed masterpiece. So the main character is Mary Catherine, and she lives alone with her older sister in their family's old estate, this huge house. And they live in this very small New England town, and all of the rest of the townspeople hate and despise them. Whenever they leave the house, they get mocked, ridiculed, harassed, treated really terribly. But when they are alone on their property, it's like Mary Catherine is living in some kind of magical fantasy kingdom. It is weird and isolated and lonely, but it is totally outside the system. It's like within that little sphere, she can do absolutely anything she wants. Her days are spent wandering the overgrown grounds of the family property, imagining she is living on another planet, eating little cakes, farting around. And maybe you are starting to see a common thread in the kinds of stories I find most appealing. There is a reason I was never able to hold down a steady job. I'm screwed up in the head and I have a problem with authority. But everyone feels that a little bit sometimes, right? I was just replaying Red Dead Redemption 2 and people love that game's early chapters for the same reason. When the Vanderland gang is living out on their own, not following anybody's rules but their own, not following anybody else's moral code, doing what they want when they want, not answering to anybody else. There is something universal in that appeal. Though, of course, that game's story is also about how fleeting and ultimately corrupt their little slice of supposed paradise actually was. It was always doomed to collapse. But I'm getting lost in another tangent here. So in the novel We Have Always Lived in the Castle, Mary Catherine's life, despite all of the hostility they are surrounded with, is kind of idyllic. It's kind of perfect. Except it's not. Because she and her sister are not actually living alone. They are also living with their invalid uncle, whose mind and body were shattered when the entire family was horrifically poisoned at a dinner a couple years prior. And his broken presence is a constant reminder that there is something really dark and sinister and dangerous underneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life. And then, pretty soon into the novel, another character arrives, and he throws their life totally off balance. And then new aspects of Mary Catherine's personality begin to appear. Jealousy, control, anger. And she transforms into this utterly fascinating character, just a masterclass in psychology and alienation and jealousy. Everyone should read We Have Always Lived in the Castle. It is a perfect novel. Alright, question number 4. This person asked, may we please see a picture of your cat or cats? I hear them in the background of your Kratos videos. You know, first of all, that is very disappointing to hear. I am so constantly frustrated by the audio quality in my videos. I just wish it was a lot better than it is. You should not be able to hear my stupid cats in the background. But yes, you can see pictures of them. I have way too many. I have 5 cats. I only wanted 1 cat, but then a starving stray showed up and she turned out to be pregnant. And then instead of giving away all the kittens like we planned, we ended up kind of really liking them too. So now I have a stupid number of cats. But here are some pictures of them. This is Duchess. She is the mother. She is a very pretty calico. This is one of her kittens, Ryza. Ryza has a very unique coat pattern. She is half tortoiseshell and half tabby. This is her sister Rosie, a very sweet tuxedo cat. And this is their brother Gomi, who likes to wake me up every day at 5 a.m. But boy, is he cute. And this is Big Blue. He just kind of showed up one day and now we're stuck with him. Alright, question number 5. This person asked, would you ever be interested in doing more breakdowns of protagonists a la the 2 videos you recently made on Atreus? I think it's a fun shakeup from the usual Psychology of a Villain videos. And I, for one, would love to hear your thoughts on Clive from Final Fantasy XVI. So the reason why I tend to focus on antagonists in stories is because they are the characters who are allowed to be flawed and complicated. Really good antagonists will always have something sympathetic in their characters, something you could root for, but they are ultimately undone by these terrible flaws which they cannot overcome. That is what makes a character interesting to me. By contrast, most protagonists, especially in video games, are not allowed to be really complicated in the same way. They tend to be good and noble and honorable, and the story ultimately rewards them for being so. For example, Aloy from the Horizon series is a character I will probably never do a video on. I think she is likable, she is easy to root for. I think the writers did a good job of putting the player in control of a character who we want to be. We want to be cool and smart and capable. It's almost a kind of power fantasy. She has some flaws, especially in the second game, where she starts off as very alone and isolated and then slowly comes to realize that she needs to rely on others if she wants to succeed. That is a solid character arc. That is good writing. But what else is there to discuss? Haven't we already said everything there is to say about her? Like, what question does her character ask? Compare Aloy's character to that of Silence from the same series. I would be much more likely to do a video about him. He is complicated, he has both benevolent and selfish motivations, he is willing to make extreme choices, to lie, to manipulate, to hurt people. He believes in the supremacy of knowledge, that truth has a greater value than anything else, even human life. That is interesting. There is something to discuss here. His character forces us to ask all of these questions. What is the value of truth? What are we willing to do to uncover the truth? And what are we not willing to do? When is he going too far? That's why I find protagonists like Joel from The Last of Us or Kratos from God of War so fascinating. It's not because I like them. It's not because I want them to be my dad. It's because they feel so flawed and so human and so real. The struggles they go through feel more meaningful because of just how deep that darkness is within them. So to answer the question, there are relatively few protagonists that I will cover on this channel. You asked about Clive from Final Fantasy XVI, and I have to say, probably not. I like Clive, but I just don't think he crosses that threshold of being flawed and complicated enough to warrant a really deep discussion. Anyway, question number 6. This person asks, favorite Souls game as well as memorable bosses that you loved fighting? Something that I've realized while playing Night Rain and seeing the general response to it is that the things I love about Dark Souls and Elden Ring are not the same as what everyone else loves about these games. There is a large percentage of the fan base that truly love the boss fights. They love getting their butt kicked over and over again, slowly learning the movesets, the strategies, feeling like they've overcome something really substantial and difficult. It's almost like an addiction for them. And to be fair, I do get it. I get how addictive that sense of challenge can be. I can recognize objectively, mechanically, why these are great boss fights, how complicated their movesets are, how they are able to interrupt their own moveset mid-attack and switch over to a different attack depending on what the player is doing, or how mobile and dynamic the boss is, not to mention the artistic design of the boss fights, the way their animations and visual design and attacks reveal things about their character or are just genuinely beautiful to look at. But for me, the boss fights are such a tiny piece of what I like about those games. The thing that I love is the world design. I love exploring these weird, surreal, broken, fantastical settings. I love feeling like an archaeologist, slowly uncovering the history of these places, how they came to be this way, what went wrong. A lot of times for me, the boss fights feel like an obstacle I have to get through so I can keep exploring more of the world. I find most of them to be kind of irritating and frustrating. Like, can you please stop doing all of these ridiculous spins and backflips and just die so that I can get back to playing the actual game? Again, I get why this is mechanically impressive, but if I had a choice, I would just skip it. I don't think I have ever beaten the final bosses of Dark Souls 2 or 3, and I didn't actually beat Elden Ring until I started making videos and I needed footage of the ending cinematics, because there was no point. After that final boss, there is nothing new to explore, nothing left to do. If I just wanted to see the ending, I can go watch it online. And while playing Night Rain, it became really obvious to me that the way I play these games is very different than the way other people play them. Like, Night Rain is cool, and again, I do like what it's doing with the story. I will do videos on it. But the gameplay has stripped almost everything that I actually like about Elden Ring. The exploration, the sense of place, all the little visual details that reveal the history of the setting. But to answer your actual question, my favorite Souls game is Bloodborne. I love the Victorian, Gothic, Lovecraftian mishmash setting, very cool. And my favorite boss is Vicar Amelia, not because of the mechanics of the fight itself, but because of the setting and the aesthetics and how it plays into the overall story, the fall of the city of Yharnam as it is relentlessly consumed by this unstoppable plague of beasts. The fight takes place inside the Grand Cathedral, which completely dominates the skyline of the game's setting, a landmark you can see from anywhere in the city. It is so massive, it naturally draws you towards it, and when you get close, you realize it is this ancient, crumbling stone monolith, a site of bizarre, profane rituals which you will never understand. And in its center, before this innermost altar, the most sacred and forbidden spot of the whole city, kneels this lone woman, mumbling a desperate final prayer, and she is wearing nothing but tattered rags. And this is a Vicar. This is probably the last living high-ranking member of the church whose power once dominated the entire city. But by this point in the story, the church has been reduced to nothing, just to this one last poor woman in rags, all alone in here. And then she transforms into a hideous beast right before your eyes, and that's it. That is the end of the healing church. The monster within has been revealed for the final time. So I don't really care about actually fighting the boss, I just love the story it tells. I would say the same thing about the Twin Princes fight from Dark Souls 3, or Morgott from Elden Ring is another cool one, fought at the foot of the Erd Tree, which dominates the map of Elden Ring in a very similar way to the Grand Cathedral in Bloodborne. This is the spot you spent the entire game trying to reach. And here is Morgott, who has to hide his identity because he was born to a condemned race, desperately fighting to protect the very order that condemned him. And midway through the fight, he is overwhelmed by his cursed blood, the thing he has spent his whole life trying to hide, and he wields his own curse in a final last-ditch effort to save the Golden Order. From a story perspective, there is something really cool happening here. But the mechanics of the fight are annoying. I hate fighting Morgott and all his somersaults and flippy bullshit. I very much prefer the bosses of the old games like Demon Souls and the first Dark Souls, when the movement felt much slower and more deliberate. Someday I will do videos about the rest of the characters in Elden Ring and in Bloodborne and in the Dark Souls trilogy, and we will get to spend a lot more time talking about all this. Moving on, question number 7. This person says, I would love to see a video on one of history and media's biggest villains, Rasputin. I personally believe he is unfairly treated as someone who he was not. Dude, have I got some crazy news for you. I once spent 2 whole years writing an entire epic historical cosmic horror novel based on the life and death of Grigory Rasputin. Will it ever be published? Probably not. It's not very good. It was better than the first novel I wrote though, so I am at least getting better, I think. But I would be happy to talk about Rasputin. The typical story around him goes something like this. Rasputin was a weirdo. He was this creepy occult mystic who wandered out of the Siberian wastes, and somehow, by some sinister plot, he caught the ear of the Empress of the Russian Empire, and through her, through manipulation and corruption and bribery, he seized control of the reins of power there and led the Russian Empire down into total destruction. He was greedy, he was a drunk, he was a womanizer, he committed every sin under the sun, and there was something almost demonic about him. He had these strange, hypnotic eyes. If you looked into his eyes, he could take control of your mind. You couldn't kill the guy. He was poisoned, he was shot, he was stabbed, he was drowned, and he just kept going. But if you dig into the reality of Rasputin, his actual life, and some of his own writings have survived, a few letters and notes here and there, not a lot, but a little. And in his own words, Rasputin was a pretty boring guy. Anytime he talks about religion, it is the most mild and benign version of Christianity you have ever heard. It's a lot of, oh, just remember that God loves you and wants what is best for you, so don't worry, kind of stuff. There are postage stamps that are more radical than Rasputin's religious ideology. And when you dig into all of those crazy stories about him and you ask, well, which of these are credible? Which ones can be sourced back to an actual eyewitness? And the answer is virtually none of them. Almost every story you have ever heard about Rasputin was based on gossip and hearsay, and written years after he was already dead. Often by people who were making money off the story, and who made more money the more exciting and sensational the story became. In the end, the really interesting question is not who was Rasputin really, because really he was just sort of an ordinary guy who, by complete random chance, got caught up in an extremely extraordinary situation that he was never in control of and was just swept up in the tide of history like everyone else. He was killed in this pathetic, pitiful assassination by a bunch of cosplaying losers, a bunch of spoiled, drunk rich kids who thought they were saving the Russian Empire, but in reality accomplished literally nothing. They all went on to become a bunch of worthless exiles after the revolution, begging their way through European high society, contributing absolutely nothing to anyone, except for this one sensational story they had to sell. The main perpetrator kept himself afloat in his later years by filing constant lawsuits against anyone who made a book or film adaptation of the Rasputin story without his approval. He was a complete loser. The really interesting question becomes, what does Rasputin's story say about us? We're the ones who conjured this mythic figure practically out of thin air. We're the ones who imbued him with so much importance and power. And I'm using we loosely here. Obviously, his contemporaries in early 20th century Russia did a lot of the work. But Western society as a whole, and American culture in particular, has continued to keep his story alive, now over a century after his death. So the question is, what are we getting out of his story? What do we need as a culture that this mythic version of Rasputin is providing? And you can ask the same thing about any historical figure. Take George Washington as an example. How does American culture or the American story benefit from his story? Not the actual flesh and blood man, but from the mythology we have built up around him. Well, we get this noble and honorable foundation, built on honesty and justice and ideals of personal freedom, conquest, and victory. And it does not matter how closely that story actually matches who he really was. It does not matter how noble or honorable George Washington actually was. What matters is what kind of leader do we want to idolize? What do we want our country to be? And so, to turn this back to Rasputin, I think we want some kind of darkness in the story of world history. We want the occult and the sinister and the whispers and the shadows, and the idea that all of this tragedy and bloodshed is not just a result of random chance or ordinary human greed. It is something more, something beyond our control, maybe even beyond our understanding. something terrible that if we just had the right tools, if we are good enough, if we are righteous enough, we could draw it out from the shadows and vanquish it once and for all. Rasputin takes this incredibly complicated story, the fall of the Russian Empire and the rise of the Soviet Union, which involves tens of millions of people, multiple decades, and so many confusing, competing factions and ideologies, none of which are completely evil or completely good, and so much random chance and so much muddled history and conflicting accounts. It takes all of that confusion and transforms it into a very simple story about good versus evil. And that is what a figure like Rasputin provides us. Simplicity, an easy narrative to understand, obvious good guys and bad guys. And there are a lot of Rasputins throughout history. Historical figures who have been turned into cartoonish figures representing pure evil, without any of the challenging complexity or messiness that comes with real life and real people. And that's what a large part of my novel was about. It followed the story of one of the assassins, and that act gave his life meaning, made him feel like a hero, like he could save his country in a single decisive act. But then Rasputin is dead and the empire keeps collapsing. The revolution and civil war arrive anyway. This simplistic story they tried to tell themselves about how Rasputin was the source of all their problems is revealed to be hollow and false. With Rasputin dead, suddenly they have to grapple with actual reality. And the reality is that this assassin is just a murderer. Which sounds great when I say it here, but when I actually tried to write that idea out in scene, it just didn't work. I just couldn't find a way to make it compelling and engaging and meaningful. Unfortunately, I'm just not a very good writer of fiction, or at least not yet, but maybe next time. I am still working on yet another novel. At least that's what I keep telling myself. I haven't actually written a new page in months. I should really get back to that sometime soon. Okay, final question. One person asked me about the possibility of opening a Patreon account. So I have been convinced for a while now that Patreon or channel subscriptions or some form of direct payment would probably be a more ethical way to earn money than through YouTube ads. I think I mentioned earlier that I find YouTube ads to be really scummy and gross and intrusive, and I wish I did not have to rely on them. But I probably never will set up a Patreon because I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea of taking money from you. Like, this whole situation is already kind of screwed up. I already feel a bit like a parasite. While everyone else is out there busting their asses every single day to survive, I am over here sleeping in every day and sitting around in my underpants and writing maybe one essay a week, if even that much, and then getting paid for it. And then I'm going to turn around and take your money that you worked your ass off to get, and I'm going to be like, thanks dude, and then I'm going to go drink a six-pack and jerk off in the corner while crying. Whenever the workers' revolution finally comes and you start eating the rich, you should probably go ahead and eat me too. I probably deserve it. I will never set up a Patreon unless it is a transaction. Like, you pay me this much each month, and I give you something substantial back every single month in return. And I have thought, like, could I make an extra video each month? Or could I put together a monthly podcast? Or could I just do like Let's Plays or streams or something and put those behind a paywall? And the answer is basically no, I cannot do an extra video a month. There's just a limited amount of time available to me. I have tried to do podcasts in the past, but I am so self-conscious and terrible in a live format. I need to prepare something to say beforehand, or else I sound like a brain-dead moron. Now, I could just sit my fat ass down in front of the TV and record myself playing Blaster Master, or whatever, for a couple hours every month and talk over it, and talk about how cool I think Blaster Master or Automata Lung is. I can talk about Blaster Master all day. That is something I very much could do, but that's just not worth $5 a month. I cannot accept that money in good conscience. So short answer, probably no Patreon coming anytime soon, unless I find myself in like really dire financial straits, and it becomes a situation where either I beg for money or the channel dies, which probably will never happen. I try to be very sensible with my finances. I run a very lean operation here, and I don't blow a lot of money. Okay, I am gonna stop there. This was a bit longer and more rambling and more self-indulgent and weird than I thought it was gonna be. But it was fun, for me at least. If you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in the comments beneath this video and I will try to answer them next time. Pretty soon I will be back with 2 more Clair Obscur videos, both on the shorter side, so they shouldn't take long to produce, and then some videos on Elden Ring Night Rain, and then hopefully I will be able to get back to the God of War retrospective series. So, see you then. Thank you for your questions and for your attention and all of the thoughtful comments you write on my videos. I truly am appreciative of your time. I am really grateful that you allow me to keep being a pantsless, blood-sucking parasite, and I hope my videos provide you with something worthwhile in return. Anyway, thank you and see you later. Oh wait. I was supposed to put the list of games and series I want to cover someday at the end of this video. Okay, so this list is in alphabetical order. It's pretty exhaustive, so if you don't hear your favorite game mentioned, just assume it's not going to get covered anytime soon. I'm sorry, but, I can't do everything. I cannot make any promises about when I will actually do videos about any of these games, but assuming I keep doing this for the rest of my life, I will get to every game on the list eventually. Okay, here it is. A Plague Tale, both games. Amnesia, the whole series. Bastion and the entire Supergiant Games catalog. That includes Transistor, Pyre, Hades, and Hades 2. BioShock, the whole series. Bloodborne, Celeste, Chrono Trigger, Control, Cyberpunk 2077. I did already post one video on Cyberpunk after the release of the expansion, but I would like to return to the game sometime. Dark Souls, the whole trilogy. Death Stranding, both games. Deltarune, whenever it's complete. Deus Ex, the whole series. Demon's Souls. Dishonored, all 3 games. Disco Elysium. Doki Doki Literature Club. Elden Ring, I will make videos about every single major antagonist and character in that game eventually, maybe once the God of War retrospective series is complete. Fallout, the whole series. Fear. Final Fantasy, the whole series, at least the main games, probably not all of the spin-offs. Ghost of Tsushima and its sequel. God of War, obviously. Grand Theft Auto, mostly just 4 and 5, and I guess 6 if it ever actually releases. Half-Life, both games. Hollow Knight. Horizon, including the new game whenever it releases. Hotline Miami. Hyper Light Drifter. Ico and the rest of Team Ico's catalog, including Shadow of the Colossus, The Last Guardian, and this new game whenever it releases. Kingdom Hearts, mainly just the second game. I thought Organization 13 was really cool when I was a kid, but I would not want to attempt to untangle the convoluted mess the plot eventually became with all those spin-offs. The Mario RPG series, Mass Effect Trilogy, Metal Gear Solid, the whole series, Metroid, the whole series, but especially the Prime Trilogy, The Legend of Zelda, the whole series, Nier, both games, Okami and its sequel whenever that releases, Portal, both games, Prey 2017, Prince of Persia, mainly the Sands of Time trilogy, Red Dead Redemption, both games, Resident Evil, the whole shebang, Silent Hill, the whole series, Sin and Punishment, Soma, Spec Ops, The Line, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, both games, System Shock, both games, The Stanley Parable, Undertale, Warhammer 40k, the tabletop. I don't know how those videos would work, but I'd love to ramble about how each of the factions fits into the overall story. And that is it. If your favorite game is not on that list, I'm sorry, but it's probably not going to be covered on this channel anytime soon. Okay, see you later. Oh yeah. Woo!